it's starting to feel a little crazier than it has, but I recognize that that's not anything objective. It's me. It's subjective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, things like coffee and Provigil, um, probably I think I'd be better off without them.
Mhm.
But
But
it has not been possible to get um, I don't remember to stop and just see that it's just an empty voice in
mm,
the mind and then pay attention to the sensation in the body until after it's too late.
yeah.
Usually, once every now and then, I don't. And but even then, it's so far it's been no success, which kind of ties back to that um, what I asked you about by email about um, what Pernilla said in the video about how if you're stuck at 4 and 5, then you need to look at the first three fetters, and then
Yeah.
you narrowed it down to the second fetter.
Yeah.
So, and and it may be unrealistic, and I probably shouldn't think in terms of what's going to happen. But when thinking about that last night or this morning, there is sort of this very brief mental movie of getting whatever that is sorted out and then going back to this and being able to successfully work with it. And then that stuff drops.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice idea. I think what's more realistic is instead of thinking of it as this stuff just, you know, like it's not that the second fetter stuff is like like a linchpin that's like holding, something in place and you pull it out and it just falls away. It's more that you're kind of building up different abilities, right? You're when we do like basic mindfulness practice, we're building up that ability to become aware of um, what we're experiencing in a way which is
Mhm.
detached from the story about it. And so that the whole practice of mindfulness meditation, as basic as it might seem, so far down the road, is really exercising certain brain pathways that are absolutely necessary for doing this stuff. And part of that is for that coming online that you said, that kind of meta awareness that comes online and goes, oh, hold on a second. This is, there is a thought here that's saying I should have a cup of coffee. Maybe I shouldn't trust that thought right now. It's basically, without going into the brain parts of it, it's basically turning on the kind of um, uh, the kind of more executive control that pauses, so you have like more well, okay, using a little bit of the brain terminology. You're turning on the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is basically the thing which is helping to direct behavior in a way that is, beneficial, helpful, functional to whatever the goal is. And you're increasing the awareness of the information coming from the insula, which is like, and increasing the insula's ability to be aware of bodily interoception, the bodily senses. So basically, what you're doing when you do that sort of thing is you're becoming more aware of the sensations that are in the body in a way which is not personal. Because normally the medial prefrontal cortex is like kind of making things about me. And so instead of that, what we're doing is basically taking the interoception. We're pausing so that we can see what is in the body, we can feel what is in the body, we're aware of that, and then having the kind of wise overview to say, okay, this is not personal, this is just a sensation. Or even, the image comes up about a cup of coffee, and there's that moment of, no, no, that's not what we were doing. There was some other objective at hand. Having that come online is really the basis for all of the mindfulness meditation, breath watching meditation, all that stuff. That's kind of where the fruit of that lies. It's having that discernment in the moment of what is being felt, what is being thought, and having that secondary level of executive control that can switch between one and the other and basically turn off that kind of selfing mechanism that makes something more out of it that's personally relevant. So when you have that, like, walk me through when you're going to have a cup of coffee or the Provigil or something, what is your actual experience of, like, great that you're recognizing it afterwards. That's still a big part of yeah, but it is still a big part of the
Yeah, you're
process,
right.
right?
You're
You
right.
have to acknowledge that. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know that you were doing it. So it's there.
No,
It's just
I
coming in
agree
at
with
the
you
later end.
because I've been through other things where it starts in that exact way, and then
Yeah.
eventually it works to where
E-
it's happening, where it's more useful.
Exactly.
But you're
And that's how
correct,
yeah, and so that's how we work with everything, with any addiction. Also with, that's how I worked with panic attacks. It's the same sort of thing where acknowledge it after it's just happened. It's like, oh, okay. But even it can be something where, like, at first you're noticing it like 2 days after it happened, and then it gets closer and closer to where it's like, just after it happened, and then you start to
right?
notice it during it, and then you start to notice. So yeah, it just works its way sooner and sooner until you start to see those precursors of what is happening just before that urge is followed through with, what is there just before that urge arises. So, in your experience, then, what is going on with the coffee now? Not maybe right now, if you don't have that, but lately. Um, what situations are you in that when those thoughts tend to be triggered and when they tend to be carried out in the um, without acknowledgement until after you've already had the coffee?
Hmm. I don't. I don't know that there is any particular sort of consistent context where it arises. My first thought was to think that it is when I'm feeling tired, but then I realized there are times where I'm not feeling tired, and I can watch the mind go through this stuff about it. It tries to generate this idea of being tired or glom onto the littlest thing in order to be able to say, "See, you're tired." So I don't know that I
So,
can't see. Go ahead.
well, are you tired or are you having another kind of craving for the coffee, which that tiredness is the justification for? Are
I
you
think it's the second one. I think
okay?
I think it's because it just seems to spontaneously appear at various times. I mean, there are sometimes like after about 5 o'clock, I won't because, I'd like to try to sleep as well as I can.
Yeah.
Uh, from the time I get up until around 3 o'clock, it's open game.
So what part of it? Okay. Ostensibly, you get the idea that yes, I'm tired. I must have coffee. Um, if you were drinking decaf coffee, would that still
Mm-mm.
justify?
No,
Okay. So
no.
what would be the benefit or the downside to having decaf coffee?
Um,
Like, if you had a craving for the coffee and you're like, yes, okay, I will have a coffee now, but it's going to be decaf. What happens?
it, it nothing would happen. Yeah, well, there's no point in that.
Okay.
That would be the internal response because it's all about the caffeine and the hope for, and I do say hope for because it very rarely pans out to really be um, um, that surge of useful energy and good feeling.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Which I think really nails it, that it's it's not even that there's a craving for the flavor of it or, the comfort of
No,
it or any of that. It's really that changing my state now is not okay. I need this chemical alteration in order to be okay. Knowing full
right.
well that the chemical alteration is very short-lived, and even in the period when it is there, it's often completely, inadequate or insufficient for what
And
we
it's
need.
unreliable because
Yeah.
I almost never get the actual effect that I'm hoping for that it used to give years and years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that, I mean, it's every drug ever known to man, right? Like you're
Yeah.
in this case chasing the brown dragon, but it's but it's that thing. We develop tolerances, and it's you it was never really, sorry, losing my voice. It was probably never doing much more than just being a deflection from something, a diversion, a change of state. And it's
That's what
still,
I've thought for the longest time.
yeah, and it's still trying to do that, but it's just not a sufficient tool. So I think what's more important is to come to terms with, why is it that it's not okay to be tired or in whichever current state you are in when you have that urge?
Well, I don't really think it's about the being tired. I mean, there are times it has been, but I think at this point in time and for some time now, it's really more about holding out, hoping for a mood changer.
Yeah, I would agree. I do think that when the mind comes in and says that yeah, but you are a bit tired, I do think that is just an excuse. It's a
Mhm.
justification for why you need it. And I do think it's
Yeah.
something else that is just it's not comfortable being here the way that it is.
And the kicker in that, I mean, the profound irony is that the drive to feel something other than what's happening right now is it's illogical when you consider that really all caffeine does is makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it can be varying degrees. It can be mildly uncomfortable to yesterday and the day before, intensely uncomfortable. I mean, just so much so that the question arose many times, why are we doing this?
And did an answer happen to arise?
No. But I do think the answer is no, no. I think it's what we've already said. I think, some irrational part, or, it seems irrational to us, part of the mind is seeking to change how things feel. And then to add to that, in terms of irony, there have been times in the last 7 or 8 years where I've gone a year, 2 years, 3 years without any caffeine,
Hmm.
zero. And once I got through the first 30 to 90 days, somewhere in there, and the mind became used to it. This is how things are now. It got to the point where I rarely, if ever, thought about it. Um, I was fine.
Hmm.
I was fine. Now is perfectly okay. I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't difficulties and problems and things that um, things that come along where wish that wasn't happening that way. But most of the time, you know, now is okay. And so it almost seems like this is a deeply ingrained habit
Hmm.
that somehow needs to be dismantled. And what I did to deal with the alcoholism, I couldn't have asked for a better result. But with this, it almost seems like there's something that's underneath it that needs to be gotten at.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I recognize it. I mean, back back like in high school, I was miserable and basically would use any household chemical or anything that would change my, state of mind. So like if it was an alter, in any way could alterate. Jeez, I'm very tired today. Speaking of tired, I'm sorry. The brain is like functioning on half cylinders at best. Um, Anything that would alter my state of consciousness was like, yes, please. Basically just change it, get out of it. So I understand that kind of motivation. And what I have seen over the course of my life as situations have changed and, practice has changed and all of that is that what was then uh, seemed to be a what then seemed to be a very large level of discomfort with being alive and looking for any kind of way to change that state of being over time it becomes more subtle, and then we just start to find all of these little inadequacies or little discomforts in life, and we start to have those more subtle ways of manipulating experience in order to feel better. So somebody who is using heroin for on one end of the extreme and somebody else who's using, social media or Netflix or just, even taking a walk or something. I mean, it's a meditation, things that we consider like healthy, beneficial habits, if they're being
Mhm.
used as a way to sort of negate this experience of discomfort, are still both tools of the same sort. Some have healthier ramifications than others, but they're coming from the same place that I cannot accept that I feel the way that I do right now. So I am either going to meditate my way out of it, numb myself with, a candy bar or some sort of narcotic or yeah, caffeine or exercise, whatever it is. It's because there's an inability to just simply sit with the body feeling the way that it does. And it might be a physical thing, it might be an emotional thing, it might be a mental thing. We might have like thoughts that are just scrolling on and on and on, and we need to distract ourselves from them. It might be that I just feel inherently kind of sad or lonely, or that there's just something, fear of the unknown, of my impending mortality, whatever it is. We have all sorts of things that are just not necessarily explicitly thought, but they're just underneath the surface that give this kind of tinge of not okayness to this moment. Or you have physical ailments, which, aches and pains and arthritis and chronic illness and things like that. And they just get so subtle, like it can take almost nothing and it will induce the body to kind of going a certain direction to try to fix the situation or distract ourselves from the situation. So the same habit that you had with alcohol years ago, that same proclivity is there because we
Mhm.
all have it. It's not even that it's like unique. I mean, there are some people that we say have like addictive personalities, and maybe genetically they're more prone to certain types of addictions and certain types of behavior, but fundamentally, it's a human thing. We
Hmm.
all have this kind of addictive, n- well, we have an aversive need, I should say, and that aversive need to escape from the moment tends to lead some people into more and more types of addictive behavior, where it's not just, okay, in this moment, I'm going to distract myself with a cup of coffee, and the next minute, I'm going to scroll on my phone, and then the next minute, I'm going to do something else. Some people develop more, metabolic addictions to things or something where there's a little bit more physiologically going on with it, but the root of it is still the same. It's still that same human aversion to simply being with whatever is here. And that leads us back to what we started out talking about, that really having that basic practice of being able to sit and just watch what is here without judgment, without making it personal or mine, has so much potency in seeing these habits as they arise and being able to not just go along with the conditioning that's been running for decades, but instead we're reconditioning the system to be able to have this um, new way of approaching the moment with whatever it happens to hold. And then when you get to the point that you can just be with whatever, we call that equanimity. You know, it's just here and it's okay. So what you're describing is, it's exactly this coming from exactly that same basis. And why we talked about the second fetter is because the second fetter issues can oftentimes be one of those, like, thorn in our foot kind of situations. It's that, or that the rock in our shoe that's like
Mhm.
making this moment feel a bit more uncomfortable than it needs to. And then we're deflecting from that emotional or traumatic discomfort that's here.
So you're saying that some sort of second fetter issue is adding fuel to the fire of whatever's already creating discomfort.
Mm, yeah,
Okay.
'cause I mean, like having an adult human body is likely already uncomfortable in some way, and then you put in like living situations, political instability, thoughts about relationships, and all the stuff that goes into it. And as long as the thinking mind is engaged, there is going to be some sort of unease in this situation. No matter where you are, no matter what life is like, there is something. Even if you're a multi-billionaire, there's a concern about your next $1 billion, where that's coming from, or how best to, you know, skew your taxes so you pay less on this, or how to manipulate people with the money, or whatever it is. Like, no matter, nobody is immune to that level of um, unease with their being the way that they are, right now in this moment. So when you have like, a pattern of thought that I am perpetually always wrong or always the bad guy or those things that we've talked about, that just reinforces whatever is here. It's adding that other layer of, yeah, okay, so I'm in a decades old, human body. There are family stresses, there are political stresses, there are financial stresses, all of these things exist. And on top of that, I am also wrong in every situation that I'm in. Well, fuck. Like it's it's just that one extra layer that is keeping us running away from what's here. So
Well,
yeah.
oh,
The
I thought
more,
you
no, no, I was just saying the more of those we can come to terms with and depersonalize and deactivate, the easier it is to be with what is here.
well, that's obviously where that would be preferred. That would be ideal. That's where I'd like to see things go. And the curious thing was is that, and I think these stimulants um, are playing a part in what I'm about to describe. In that, going back a while ago, I mean, I don't know, a month ago, a couple of months ago, um, it was possible to more or less be okay with all of the various things that were going on.
Mm,
You know, I wasn't too terribly concerned with the whole political situation. I mean, there were reactions to it, but it wasn't something that would, um, somebody would say something, would get a foothold, and then, then that becomes a problem. And, there's this sense of fear or anxiety or what have you. I would hear it, there'd be a reaction, and then it would just kind of be forgotten.
yeah.
And then, of course, all the stuff going on in the house. And, I was really surprised by the fact that this stuff really wasn't, it really wasn't a big problem. It wasn't something that was creating a lot of stress and that there was a lot of worry over. Was able to, like I said, more or less be okay with things as they were. And then here in the last 3 to 6 weeks, that started to change. Now it's more of a trying to play ostrich with the head in the sand when it comes to
Mm,
politics. I'm
yeah.
okay as long as I don't think about it or talk about it. And then, we've had some weird financial problems,
Mm,
and Susanna's situation has seemingly, I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems like it's been getting worse.
Man.
Not in a serious way. It's not like the heart condition's worse. It's just she's having a harder time breathing. Her mobility has been affected more. Um, and she's having to work on top of that, which that
Yeah.
just kills me because I truly cannot be gone from the house. I mean, I can't. I, I started leaving the house to do shopping again rather than having it delivered because
Right.
expense and there are other difficulties along with it. And
Yeah.
when I went out, I got a text from her one point, and when are you guys going to be back? I need this, and um, which is fine. It's fine that she needs it. I understand it completely,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was, I felt bad about it. But anyway, so I can't be gone from the house for prolonged periods.
Yeah.
So leaving the house to work, is out of the question.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to deal with, I don't know how to resolve the fact that I feel guilty about the fact that she's having to work under the conditions she's having to work under. And I can support her and do everything she needs me to do for her, but it doesn't resolve that feeling bad because she's in the position that she's in.
Yeah.
And it's not my fault, but it's almost like some part of the mind thinks it's my fault.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. First of all, I mean, it's not your fault, right? It is the way that the cards have been
Just turned
dealt at
out.
this particular time. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, we've talked about that before that your um, you know, her job history, it makes more sense for her to be working right now
Oh, yeah.
than you in any, situation. The compassionate element is really important, which I'm glad you have towards her, and I'm not trying to stifle that, you know. But when you have the feeling about guilt about it being that way, can you walk me through a bit more about what the actual experience is like of thinking about her working? What are the protestations that come up in the mind? What are the feelings that you say, it feels like it's your fault in some way or something? Like, what is actually coming up that is giving this whole, milieu of guilt?
Hmm. Well, I think a big part of it is the fact that in the last few weeks, last 3 or 4 weeks, I've heard things said by other people um, about our situation, and whether it's the family of Tuesday's boyfriend, one of Susanna's nieces, one of Susanna's coworkers, people are saying, "Well, why's the one with the heart failure?" And keep in mind, I should qualify it for anyone who doesn't understand the situation that it's not actually full-on, full-fledged heart failure.
Mm.
Her what do they call it? Rejection fraction, I think is what it is extremely high. It's as high as basically a healthy heart. It's just a stiff
Right.
heart,
Yeah.
and it all is a result of the fact that she's overweight and has to work harder.
Yeah.
So they actually say it's not heart failure. They say it's diastolic heart failure, which is basically it's very mild,
Mm.
but it's enough to create problems for her. Anyway, but they're saying, why is the one with heart failure the one working?
Yeah.
And um, I think that is a big part of it. But what the situation or the context in which this will show up is she'll be working and I can see she's really tired. Or she'll be working and she'll get up to go to the bathroom or do something, and she's really having a hard time moving, and I can hear how labored her breathing is, and there's just this sense of in a better world, not even in an ideal world, in a better world, there would be something that could be done to allow her to get through this with either reduced or no work
Yeah.
without a loss of income, etc. And but that's not the case. And so I see what she's dealing with, and I feel helpless. I mean, yeah, do I do everything I can for her? I do everything I can for her. I believe it. I mean, I
Yeah.
really do. I mean, just to give a small taste, earlier she'd asked for ice water, and I went and got her water, and I forgot the ice. And I was all the way back here on the other side of the house, and I heard her call out, "Is there not any ice?" So I got up and went back, and I did the whole thing all over again because she has to measure the water because she has restricted intake.
Okay.
Um, so I went back out and then, remeasured everything so that there was ice and she had the amount she's supposed to have. Um, and then, of course, that was in the middle of a typical situation that we see day in, day out, multiple times a day, where I I sit down within 5 to 15 minutes. I get up again. I sit down. I get up, and that happens multiple times.
Wow.
So anyway, that's I just tell you that just to kind of give you an idea of yeah. I mean, I do everything that I can.
Yeah.
Um, and anyway, so I do everything I can, but it doesn't stop the feeling. I don't know what else to call it, but guilt, just this sense of I can't take this off of her. And I don't know, somehow I don't know how, I don't understand how, somehow it gets directed back at me. Maybe it was the people who've been making comments about our situation. Um, I don't know, but it winds up becoming, um, if I had done things differently, or you know, if I don't know, something, and because I can't, I feel bad about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. It's fine. I mean, it does strike me that anybody who's watching this from most other countries that aren't US, especially any country in Europe, it basically is not going to understand what you're talking about. Unfortunately, it's when you think of the situation that we have here is quite unique in the lack of public support.
Yeah,
Like the better world that you're talking about, I think is Europe. Really,
yeah,
like when you say that. So there are places where it is possible for her to not work and to, um, still have money coming in and all of that because it's considered a basic human right in other parts of the world. Here we have this extra layer of complication, this rugged individualism that we're supposed to have, right? Where fend for yourself and figure it out. And it puts so many people, not just you guys, into really untenable situations.
yeah,
The problem is we have a mentality that says, basically, if life is difficult, you must be doing something wrong. It's like there's this thought like, yeah, but you should be able to fix it. There should be a solution. Well, it might be that the solution is actually just a better system that takes care of its people, and
yeah,
maybe, we're in a bad situation that's unnecessary. And so instead of taking the blame directly on you, and I'm not saying just pass the buck to someplace else,
mm,
but recognizing that there is also an inherent unfairness, if we're going to use, that kind of idea within the sort of system that we're in. And from there, we can then start to kind of open up the that sort of guilt channel so that when other people are saying, well, why is it this way? You are kind of taking that guilt on personally, as
mm-hmm,
opposed to looking at maybe the higher version of this or the higher view where it's like, no, actually the situation itself is problematic and it's not just your fault that the situation is the way that it is. There are systemic issues as to why the situation is the way that it is. Within the kind of, bubble where we are, where that is our reality, then we can figure out whatever we can do, and there might be more things that you can do, there might not be. There might be sidelines to bring in more money so she could work less. Those things might be options, by all means, investigate all of them. But for our purposes here, without, trying to find exact life, uh, um, you know, practical steps to, financial freedom or whatever. I think it's important to recognize that it is never just on you as far as the reason why things are the way they are.
Mhm.
It extends so far out in every possible direction. You are not existing in a vacuum. The
Right.
society that you're in plays just as much of a role as, whether you have chosen or not to have a job or not have a job, or what job you've had and what job she's had and all of that. The the web stretches out so far beyond just that little individual sense of me doing something wrong. When other people say, well, why is it that you're not working and she is? That is triggering that sense of that little individual me who is separate, who is making a bad decision, completely disconnected from the entire web of everything else that is related to it. And it's not only unfair, but it's just, it's illogical. It's inaccurate. That you unfortunately it appears the way that the situation is the way that the situation is. And again, maybe you can find some other way to um uh what's the word? Bring in a little bit more income so that, if that sort of thing is possible to make her life a little bit easier, maybe it's not. But regardless, it's really about breaking down that concept of um, that individual sense of responsibility in this regard.
Hmm.
That all of that guilt is being, self-directed to. They say something, so I feel this way. Now, of course, you feel that way because there is part of you that actually believes it to be true, right? There has to be something in there that actually agrees with it. It resonates,
Yeah.
otherwise you wouldn't feel it. But that's why we go down to then, just because I feel it to be true, is it actually true? We need to question and, in some cases, disconnect or refabricate those fundamental beliefs that say that, no, I'm actually it is all my fault. Honestly, everything is my fault. Really, I could have done everything differently and probably should have. You know, when we have that, each time some hint of that arises, we need to be able to recognize that that is that same old programming, and then take a breath. Question, is this true? In this particular instance, is that true? Could I have done anything different than I did? Can I do anything different than I'm doing now? And obviously you can do like some problem solving, but it can also be more of a rhetorical question where we really understand that sense of, oh, wait a minute, this is actually the way that it is. I've been looking for 3 years and I can't figure out any other opportunity to change this. I think this might just be the way that things are. Is it true then that I am to blame for it? Well, no. I mean, again, the political environment of the past 40 years is also to blame for it. Like we could just go on and on and on with all of the reasons that things are the way that they are. Um, and where exactly do I arbitrarily stop uh that border of responsibility? Oh, well, it's here. I should have pulled myself up from my bootstraps because that's absolutely possible. How much do we take on, and how much do we believe, and um, how much is that influencing our self-thoughts, the self-talk, and all of those emotions that we feel in regard to our situation?
Hmm. I don't know. I mean, you said how much, right? How much of that do we take
Yeah, I
on?
mean, again, it's kind of rhetorical, but it's like seeing for yourself every time it comes up that, oh, hold on a second. This is another bit of that same kind of programming that says that,
Yeah.
you know, I this guilt is mine alone. This is, this responsibility is mine. And then catching all the different ways that that shows up throughout a day and keep pulling it back to, hold on, here it is again. Is that true?
Hmm. Um, you know, it I had caught something recently that I recognized as the old program, just kind of a variation on that theme.
Mm,
But with the exception of that, and it was something that it was got my attention enough, it seemed important enough that I wrote about it briefly just to keep a record of it. But I haven't really it, I don't think it had ever occurred to me that it can wear a lot of different masks.
hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it can. Um, and we should also be aware. So, for everybody who's watching this, it's also important to ground all of this with a good measure of morality and compassion, because it is absolutely possible to take this whole, lack of responsibility, lack of free will, lack of guilt, the unreality of guilt in general. We can take all of that, and if we aren't coming from a developed enough place with it, you can just turn yourself into a raging sociopath.
Mhm.
Not optimal. It's not what we're going for. So just, for anybody who hears that, I think what we're talking about is further down the road of self-development in terms of we have to have already built up good positive habits of emotional or emotional and compassionate hygiene where we're not taking advantage of other people. We have some sense of moral compass that guides us, and that you're you can feel confident that the programming is such that you're still going to do the right thing. You're not overstepping on people, you're not crossing their boundaries. You're not just relying on other people to do everything for you and lounging around doing nothing, that you have, that like sense of the initial feeling of guilt when you do something wrong is okay. Like that initial pang of that's,
Yeah,
okay, I hurt somebody. I'm not going to do that again. That's
yeah, that's
great.
useful.
Exactly. It's great. It's useful. We want to keep that. It's that the more long term where we take that and we extrapolate it out to the sense of self, who is just an inherently guilty thing and who needs to be shamed for its own existence. Like that's so much to unpack in that. There's so much to work with, and that is all unnecessary. Um, but I see there's kind of a danger in that people can hear it and just be like, oh, great, not responsible for anything. Let's
Sure.
fun. And that's completely not what we're talking about.
It's interesting what you said, though, somewhere in all of that about the lack of choice, lack of free will, because in the last couple of weeks, there have been several different times where I recognize that there are parts of my life where it has become understood at a deep enough level that there isn't anyone who can make a choice, that there is no such thing as
Mhm.
choice. It's
Yeah,
just causes and conditions,
yeah,
um, at a very, very local level.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and because of the fact that that's understood, um, there are certain things where the idea of taking some sort of action, trying to force things, trying to make things happen, I don't do it. I just leave it alone. I recognize that these sorts of things are going to happen when they happen. That'll have to,
Mhm.
all the conditions will have to line up, and then this will occur if it's going to.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I see the truth of it. And I live with it that way. It's like, okay, I'm not going to press that. That's, a thought in the mind says, why don't you? Or you should, or that needs to. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, there's not any intention, there's not any desire, there's none of the things that usually cause the organism to go and follow through on that. So
Yeah.
we'll wait for it to happen when it happens. But
Yeah.
it's limited to or isolated to these certain areas of my life when it comes to what we're talking about with feeling guilty, feeling like I should have, why didn't I, why can't I, or whatever it might be. And it just that doesn't come up. The mind doesn't present that saying, well, there wasn't any choice in this anyway.
Yeah.
You know,
I know. It is funny, isn't it? It-
it's perplexing as hell.
yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I love Dr. Robert Sapolsky. If you're familiar, he's
I've heard the name, but I don't. I've probably from Hugh, I'm going to guess, but I don't. I've heard the
probably,
name. That's all, just recognition.
yeah. He's really, really brilliant. And he has written books and done many talks about how, it is impossible that any of us have free will. Like it's just, he's actually a primatologist and I think neuroscientist, as I recall. I can't remember his other, but yeah, but he said multiple times in interviews that even though he is like completely convinced that there is no such thing as free will, he only lives like that like 3 minutes out of every year or something like that. Like he finds
Huh.
it because and it's this sort of discrepancy that we see between like scientists who know that there's no self and no free will based on all of that cognitive understanding and the actual application of it in daily life, which is what we try to do. We try to make it so that it's a lived experience and not just
Right.
conceptual. And so he's one, and I love him. I'm saying, nothing against him. It's just something that he has said multiple times in interviews that he it doesn't it doesn't play into his understanding of how he makes decisions in life. Or it doesn't play into his experience, I should say, of how what it's like to be Robert Sapolsky and to live his life. That when they bring him in death penalty cases to like argue why this person should not get the death penalty because there is no way that they had free will to commit the crime that they did and extrapolate the whole thing out based on the biology and he's been testified in court multiple times in this sort of thing and yet in his daily life it still feels like he can make decisions and make choices and has free will because it's purely conceptual. So what you're talking about is that on one level, you have like clear conceptual knowledge of it, and in some cases, you have had some clear sort of integrated insight or understanding of the lack of free will. And I think the best way that that can be maybe described or experienced is when we are really present and recognize that we have no idea how the words are coming out of our mouth when we speak, how our hands are moving, how any of the experience that we're doing is the way that it is, that we've just gotten up from the chair and moved across the room and gotten a drink and come back and had no idea that we hadn't any thought that we were going to do that action. I
Mhm.
only became aware of it as it was going on. I mean, the stat at this point is something like 95% of all of our behavior is completely subconscious. We have no idea even, we're not even consciously aware of 95% of the things which are moving us in any given direction. So of course we have no access to be able to um, uh, make decisions otherwise. But the question is also, who is it that we're talking about? The when we talk about there being no free will, you have genetic predispositions, you have biological conditions, you have all of the conditions of the things around you in your environment, all of the different brain states that are there, the development of your particular brain based on its genetics and conditioning and, the things that it's done and its past experiences that it has taken on as being priors for how it then projects and predicts what it thinks is happening out there around you. All of that is conditioned, and all of that is outside of anyone's control. If we could say that anything has free will, maybe we could say that there are parts of the brain which are, coming online, choosing something versus something else. But again, those choices are only being made because of the experiences that it has had before, the assumptions that it's making about what is going to be the correct or the incorrect pattern of behavior to follow. Again, all the genetic stuff, there's no way to break down everything so that we have a completely clean free will choice. But the deeper issue is that when we talk about it, we're usually still coming from that flawed sense of self that doesn't actually exist. We talk about it as though I have free will or I don't have free will. In either of those cases, there is a central I that is presumed to be there who either can do something or can't do something. And both of those are effectively a wrong thought. Both
Right.
of those are inaccurate. Um, when you have these like really sticky times, like you were talking about, where, well, actually, let me backtrack before then. So the other kind of issue with the not having free will is that fundamentally having the understanding or the belief that there's no free will is itself another condition which is causing future behavior to be different than it would be if we didn't have that um, belief.
Huh.
So your rationale that you made of, yeah, but I can't control this anyway, so I'm not going to, engage with that thing because I'm not feeling an urge towards it. It's just the mind saying it. I'm not doing any of it anyway. I can't do it. That pattern of behavior itself is being conditioned by the belief that there's no agent there, that you can't do it.
Right.
Otherwise, you probably would have acted differently. So the actual outcome of every behavior is dependent on the beliefs in the system that precede it. If we have a belief that there is no free will, then the behaviors are going to reflect that belief. If we have a belief that we do have free will, the behaviors are going to reflect that belief. It doesn't mean either are true, and it doesn't mean that there's a central figure who is actually evidencing and exercising their agency or not. It's just that it is another cause in that web of causes and conditions, which is making a different pattern of behavior. So I'm always like, um, what's the word? Mm, a bit critical of this when people like in the radical non-duality world say things like that there's nothing to do and there's no one to do it. So, that is coming from an understanding of something which is ostensibly in one way true, but having that as a belief and not a lived experience. That's like the sort of end goal experience that they're pointing to. But when we take it on and use it as a belief, that belief conditions the behaviors that follow. So if I have the belief that there's no me and there's nothing to do, I am more likely going to act out of that belief and not meditate, not do inquiry because there's no me and there's nothing to do, so it must already be done. And your experience then is going to be very different from somebody who holds the belief, yeah, I know ultimately I understand. I've heard that there's no self and there's no free will, and I get it totally conceptually, but it feels like I can sit down and meditate, or it feels like I can do inquiry, and so I'm going to do it. That is going to lead to a very different outcome than the person who just operates from the belief that there's no free will. So the first thing I wanted to touch on there is when you have that idea that like, you know, I'm not going to engage with this because there's no agency here. Anyway, there is like we need to use discernment when we are invoking any sort of belief to determine a course of action. If that makes sense. You can have a complete understanding experience of the fact that I am either going to do the thing or not going to do the thing, and recognizing the whole time that you are either doing the thing or not doing the thing, that it feels like there's absolutely nobody here who's doing anything, and the body is simply moving, and it's like completely autonomous, and it's just living out a life independent of some agent who's in the middle of it pulling the strings and levers. You can have that direct experience as whatever happens happens. But when we invoke that idea that I can't do it anyway, so I'm just going to wait and let things happen, that is itself another behavioral conditioning. Maybe then it gets taken on, and so the body does not do the thing, or maybe it still does the thing regardless, depending on what it is. Maybe the all of the conditions weigh it out that even that thought that I shouldn't be doing it isn't enough to keep you from doing it. So all of that being said, it's just important to discern between the direct full experience and like visceral understanding that there is nobody here who has any free will or agency, and the sort of philosophical position that there's no free will or agency, and then using that to navigate behavior, because that will lead to a very different outcome. When you have those experiences about, like those really sticky things that you were experiencing, the issue with that is that you have all of this conditioning that's in the system that is telling you that, you know, you are guilty by definition. There is something just fundamentally wrong. And when you have that, the biology is basically conforming to live out that belief. It's the If you don't have that level of being able to step back and observe it kind of from a distance, it's just going to keep playing out over and over again, because again, there is no actual agent in there who can do otherwise. So it's just changing that conditioning because it feels really sticky. And it feels really sticky because it's still very personal, and it's still coming from something which hasn't yet been, the belief in whatever that is hasn't been broken yet. I think is maybe the best way to say it. There's still a fundamental belief which has either not been acknowledged or just is still at play. Once those beliefs are decommissioned, then the pattern of behavior will spontaneously change on its own.
Okay. Um, I got a question about that, but before I ask it, I wanted to mention something because I don't know if this is if there is a mistaken idea or belief in here or not. When I was talking about how there's certain areas or certain parts of my life where I don't, I recognize that these things are just going to happen when they happen. Where that's coming from is all of the time I have spent in the last year or however long it's been paying very close attention in the moment when there's a decision
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how it's something that happens of its own accord. There's not someone in there who's making that decision.
Yep.
And that has been done so many times that while it hasn't been completely dissolved or broken in in entirely. Um, there are still ways it still persists, but at the same time, it has been clearly seen and understood that there's no one making a decision.
Mm.
Uh, and so there are things that haven't been, there are various things that for a while now, they haven't been done, even though there's a desire to do them. And for whatever reason, they're not being done.
Yeah.
And so when that desire comes up, or when there's a thought, well, it'd be really nice to do that, or you really need to do this. And I recognize it hasn't happened yet. And if there was someone who could make that decision, then it would happen. So it's not going to happen until, for whatever reason, something tips the scale and some part of the committee decides to follow through on that. So I don't know if I'm operating from a mistaken belief in there, or if that's coming from a more, for lack of a better word, genuine place that's based on the time I've spent looking and seeing how the whole decision process really works.
Yeah. Yeah, I get where you're coming from. I think the issue is that some of that the what show up as conscious thoughts can actually be part of the decision making process. It's not a you who is making the decision, right? But processing is happening. Decisions are being made,
Right,
right? And sometimes that, like we said, 95% of this is all subconscious, but the 5% that is conscious also still often plays a part. There is still some bloop up into consciousness, and then that sends this reflexive, you have the thought about, I don't know, taking out the garbage, and then you that triggers a feeling of, oh, no, not now, way too late, don't want to do that, whatever. That is feeding back into the system that is helping to make that decision. That kind of like the checking back in between the sensations in the body, the new thoughts that sprout of like, it's dark out, it's cold, it's whatever, I'm tired, I'm in my pajamas. All of those things are helping to weigh the scale one way or another.
sure,
And
yeah,
it's not personal, but they are, part of the process that's actually happening. Uh,
right.
So I'm curious if you could give like one example of, because you had two kinds of varieties, which I think are probably coming from different places. You had the, I would really like to do that, but I haven't done it, so it's probably not going to happen. And the, I feel like I should do it, but I haven't done it, so it's probably not going to happen. And those are two very different starting points. I would like to, and I should. Very opposite things, and probably have different components to them. So if you could pick one to start with, and we could, kind of walk through that, I think it might be helpful.
Well, here's the funny thing, because oftentimes those two things coexist with regards to various things. Like, for instance, um, I have some breadboards on the kitchen table. No one uses the kitchen table. So they've been
Yeah.
sitting undisturbed on the kitchen table for a while. And everything to work with them is there.
Yep.
All I have to do is just sit down and begin. And I don't remember when I put those on the table. I don't remember when I unpacked
Yeah.
everything and put it there and got it ready. And numerous times over a period of time, I will see it and there's a desire. I mean, it seems like a great idea.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's also something that you really should. You need to do this. So there are times when they seem to coexist. Sure looks that way. Um, but if I'm going to break them down into two more or less clearly separate things, um, okay, for the should, there is a part of the I don't know what you call it. We have a building out back. Um, that I mean, when I say building, I don't mean like a little metal shed. I mean, this is actually constructed,
Yeah.
with, beams and foundation and all of that, has electricity uh, and power tools in it and stuff like that. And so that's where a lot of those things get done. And on the outside of it is this stripping. I guess it's a weather stripping. I'm not sure, that goes around um, where the roof ends, and there's a board there. And part of that came off, and it's been hanging there for longer than I can remember. And I'm out back multiple times every day, and I see it again and again and again. And you really need to do that. You really
Mhm.
need to do that. You really need to do that. But for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. So there's your should.
Okay. So in a situation like that, what is driving the idea that you should do it?
Um, Exposed wood that could get weathered, and um, um, that it would, it could eventually turn into not just needing to put the plastic piece back up, but that I have to replace some or all of that wood that
Mhm.
is there. It could become a bigger problem.
Yep. And what is the when you see it and you have that I should, what stops you from actually starting the process and just doing it? What is the feeling that comes up?
Hmm. Well, this isn't going to be very clear, but and I don't know that it's ever verbalized, but it's kind of this feeling of I don't want to.
Mm.
And that I don't want to is built on this never-ending list of things that need to be done around here. Whether
Mhm.
it's just regular house cleaning stuff or whether it's house maintenance, the kind of stuff that comes up sporadically. There's
Yeah.
just always a list. So I think, well, there's another thing. Put it on the list.
Yeah. Yeah. But the I don't want to part because your list is, just going to keep growing. And you know
Yeah,
that if
exactly.
you don't take care of it, also the list is going to get exponentially worse. So,
Yes.
there is that oh, what is there's an old Taoist saying that I can't think of the specifics
The
of.
one about dealing with problems when they're small.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't think of the actual statement or the
I
actual thing.
can't either, but
Yeah.
I know the sentiment because it comes to mind frequently.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Yep. So there is something to be said for that, but I think the importance is when you have that feeling of I just don't want to, go below that. What does it actually feel like to not want to in that moment?
Ooh, okay.
Where, yeah, how do you know that you don't want to do
It's a good question. Um,
it?
hmm, it it's just a sensation, a feeling in the body, and um, a thought. And it seems like there's almost kind of a mental feeling tone.
Mhm.
It seems,
Sure.
but I'm that whole thing about Vedna, it has started to become something that I, I'm I'm becoming, I guess, somewhat suspicious of it. Uh,
Hmm. Good.
so at any rate, though, but it seems like there's kind of a mental feeling tone around it. This thought, the um, or a mental component, because sometimes it's not even really in words. And like I said, a feeling in the body, a sensation, somewhere here on the central channel.
Good. Does that being there dictate whether or not you can go to the hardware store and pick up the stuff and fix the
No,
strip?
no, it doesn't. And in fact, as an aside, yesterday morning, um, there was a moment where I saw it very clearly in a way that it hadn't been experienced before. Of why do you believe what a thought says?
Hmm.
Why do you believe what a thought says? It's just a thought. It has no more substance than the sound of that dog barking off in the distance. They're
Exactly.
really not any different. They're
No.
just these experiences.
Yep.
Um, and there was something in the body that went along with this, where it was really felt that it seems patently absurd to believe what a thought says and then take up any action or do anything based on the thought.
Hmm.
Now, even though I saw that very clearly, obviously things like this still exist. So I don't know, you know, how it gets from being able to see that clear as a bell to the point that it seems ridiculous to do anything a thought says,
Hmm.
uh, to actually getting to a point where thoughts are not taken seriously at all anymore. So,
Let's actually reverse or invert the insight because
okay.
it's lovely that you have that, but there is nestled in that still the feeling that there's an I who can either disregard the thoughts or acknowledge them and take them on.
Hmm.
It's a hidden component in there that I can just disregard the thoughts and then go about my day. I believe the thoughts and have to do their bidding. That is
Ah,
that idea is still nestled within it.
wow. Okay.
Instead, the reality of it is something more along the lines of that thoughts are simply arising.
Hmm.
And within the deep mechanism of whatever it is that drives this body, some of those thoughts tend to have a utility, many of them do not. None of them need to be um, disturbing or distractions because there is nothing in here to disturb or distract.
Right. Although there can be
If,
the sensation that we would call disturbing.
sure, but that again is who is being disturbed,
Right. It's
right?
impersonal.
Exactly. There's an impersonal quality to it. So keeping sort of flipping or inverting that way of looking at it so that it's not just that I am here calming my mind so that I am sitting with a clear open sky without thoughts floating around in it is great. And then I am here being lambasted by thoughts and they are just driving me from one place to another. Both of those come from that same flawed fundamental assumption of one who is in there in relationship to the thoughts.
Okay.
Instead, the closest I think approximation that we have is that the thoughts themselves are helping to create the sense of the one who is at their mercy or who is ignoring them or distracting
Yeah.
themselves from them. So when you have the also the other interesting thing of that before kind of pull back into the other inversion for a moment,
Okay.
even when you because you had said that you have like you recognize the thoughts and you can that they have no inherent meaning or power and that they're just like a dog barking in the distance, but that also there's a belief in the idea that um I haven't fixed that weather stripping yet, so I'm probably not going to until it happens, right? That's
You froze for a second, so the
oh
last thing I heard, but it sounded like
my
you're about to
bad.
say the word fixed.
Oh yeah, so if you have the thought that I haven't fixed that weather stripping yet, so it's probably not going to happen, that in itself is another thought which is being believed,
Okay.
right? And so that is directing my behavior because I believe that, well, I'm either going to fix it when the time is right and I just do it, or it's not going to get done. That's still a belief. That's a thought that's being believed. Instead, what is actually happening is that there's this kind of autonomous move either towards fixing the building or not. And any thoughts about it are confounding the whole experience. They're
Oh,
complicating whether it happens or not because we're creating thoughts about whether it's going to happen or not based on, prior conditions. I haven't done it yet. It's probably not going to do it in the future. It's on the list. Maybe it'll get done at some point. Maybe it'll just collapse. We'll see which one happens first. But having that thought is itself part of the conditioning which is driving the upcoming behavior. In do you know are you getting
I'll be honest with you, it is a little unclear.
yep.
If you can maybe kind of simplify that.
Yeah. When you mm, when you have a thought about doing anything, whether
Hmm.
it's fixing a shed or making dinner or taking out the garbage, when you have a thought about it, it's like an acknowledgement that this thing has been has been flagged as being important in some way, right? This
Hmm.
biological organism in this system knows that garbage needs to be taken out, sheds need to be fixed, food needs to be cooked. The fact that the thought arises is like kind of a call or a reminder to some sort of action. Now, if there's no second layer of thought going on, you might find that the body just stands up and starts heading to the hardware store or the kitchen or taking out the garbage, and it just kind of happens. There's another secondary layer of thought, though, which might be, oh, yeah, but I kind of just don't feel like doing that now. And I haven't done it in the past. I'm probably not going to fix it anytime in the future, but I'll put it on the list and that'll be a thing. That is a, a how do I phrase that differently? It's not just the natural arising of experience that is itself creating more identification and creating more belief and kind of gumming up the works of the system so that it's less likely that that thing is going to happen.
So if it was not coming from that kind of place,
Yeah.
then what would it look like if it wasn't what you're describing?
Either doing or not doing. Everything else is a thought about it. The body has either come and sat here for this meeting, or it has gone, ooh, hit the microphone, or it has gone off and just, bought a motorcycle. Like the thing either happened or it did not happen. The Whether I'm going to sit here or stand up and go to the bathroom is not under that kind of conscious control like we normally give it. There is a point at which there will be self-reflective thoughts that come in and out that say, "Oh, should I? Well, maybe I should wait. Well, maybe I don't think I can. Can I check the level of the bladder? Let's see." And then it's like most of that is subconscious. Some of that will poke up into the conscious, experience. So there's like this self-awareness of this whole dialogue that's going on between the body and the mind. Eventually, the scale gets tipped one way or another. And either we find that, nope, I can wait it out, or nope, need to pause and then excuse myself and go to the bathroom. And then that action happens. The actual back and forth of the mind is not under our conscious control. If
Right.
anything, there's like this meta level of witnessing, of seeing the interplay back and forth. Like all of our prodigious doubts that so many of us experience, not just on the spiritual path, but in general, it's because there's this kind of self-awareness of multiple different patterns of thought that are conflicting and going back and forth against each other. And I feel like I'm conflicted, but no, there's this higher level awareness of the fact that a conflict in thought is happening and it feels a certain way in the body. And so that gets personalized into being me who is feeling a sense of doubt or feeling a sense of conflict. It's not. It's just a convenient illusion created by this kind of awareness of what's going on in the body and the mind. Same thing when you have that experience about do I go out and fix the weather stripping or not? There are going to be different factors. Were you in the middle of doing something else when you saw it that seems to be more important right now that gets done first? Are the levels of energy storage in the body such that that just seems like one task way more than I have energy for, and the body is just not going to be able to feasibly do it? Are there things that you want to do right now that you are actually, more interested in going to than doing that because that just doesn't seem quite as fulfilling or fun. So the idea of the other thing just sounds better. There can be dozens or hundreds of other possibilities of what's there, but all of that is influencing whether or not it happens. just that sort of extra layer of thought that says, I'm not going to do it until basically it feels right or I see it happening, is itself just part of that conditioning, which is leading to another behavior going forward. It's 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 not based off of anything real because there is no I in the center of that who is hearing the thoughts, making the decision, and either doing the thing or not. But the entire system itself is being influenced by that thought.
Well, then how do we sidestep getting wrapped up in this, I guess what it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, creation of another sort of belief or self-belief that results from this? How do we avoid generating another version of me?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in doing, first of all, that kind of meta awareness is really helpful because you're aware of the components as they show up. So when you go to, you go out and you see the weather stripping there, being aware in the moment of the different feelings in the body that that evokes, the different thoughts that are conflicting, saying I should do it. What does that feel like? Where is it? Is it guilt behind it? Is it worry that I'm going to, stop the problem while it's small rather than making it so that it ends up costing $20,000 and being a whole, big project? Is it fear? Is it guilt? What is underneath that feeling of should? Having clear awareness of then, well, what is keeping me from doing it now? Well, what is that feeling of not wanting? Well, that just feels like low energy in the body. It feels like I have something else that I would actually rather do. It feels like, I don't know, Susanna asked me to do something else, and that's first and foremost right now, and maybe that'll come later. Recognizing all the thoughts that pop up and all the sensations that show up in the body to kind of reinforce that and just allow them to be. And then the actual doing of the thing, it is largely determined on kind of the conditioning of the system. So I think the more we do this, the more we're building up what we might consider like healthy habits.
Mhm.
So if somebody has a habitual pattern of just, say, avoiding work or avoiding difficulty and always doing the easy thing, they're going to find themselves lying on the couch a lot of their life. And every time an opportunity arises, they're probably going to default to the easy thing.
Mhm.
If we have the proclivity to take care of things as soon as they're seen, and we start to just go into motion to problem solve and to fix, then that's going to be kind of the behavior of the system. We're more likely to, when we see it, oh yeah, actually, I'm going to go take care of that now. And then there's no resistance to it. It's just that's the pattern of behavior that's online. Going to go buy what I need, come back, fix it, done. Don't have to ever think about that again. Wonderful. So if we want our lives to be more like that, then we just have to become aware of um, what is the resistance that shows up to doing that, and then question if that resistance is real. Is that resistance as much of an move as is the resistance as powerful as the relief of having it taken care of and not having to think about it again? You
So
having
you're
some,
it's which
yeah.
one is stronger?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
okay.
Is the resistance to doing it and just having it on the list, is that more of a comfortable or persuasive outcome rather than just doing the work half an hour later or hour later it's done and you never have to think about it again. But that's a habitual pattern of behavior that comes online the more we do it. The more you just
Wow.
get, in the habit of just doing the thing, taking care of it, and then, you're moving on, the more that's likely to be there. Again, not personal, just behavioral patterning. So recognizing what the real motivations are in any given moment is super important because if my motivation for fixing it is to not have to worry about having that ever again and to keep the house in good running order so that it's, easier to take care of and there's less to do, that's going to be the foundational motivation for doing it. If, on the other hand, I'm motivated by, you know, um, just doing what's easy in the moment and not expending any more energy than is absolutely necessary right now, and then just having the kind of mental weight and guilt, and I can handle that of not doing the thing, then yeah, you're just gonna, default to the other position of just not doing. Of course, it tends to be much more complicated because you have other things on the table that you're doing and all of that. But it's really just about becoming aware in the moment of where the motivation lies. Is it to, um, does it feel good to do the thing and have it done? Does it feel better to not do the thing now and put it off till some future time when maybe it will happen or maybe not? And is the motivation to avoid guilt? Is the motivation to avoid, um, you know, uh, the collapse of a shed or the negative, outcomes that could possibly happen? Is the motivation the positive one of feeling good that I've successfully completed something, or the feeling that, I have successfully avoided doing something I didn't want to do? Like it could be any number of things, but you just need to get in contact with your particular motivations to see whether they are grounded in anything that you actually want to maintain.
If they're grounded in anything you want to maintain. So, in other words, being clear on if these motivations are underneath behaviors and habits that I want to keep.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Are these, yeah, if you have a proclivity towards, you know, ease and letting things go to hell around you, then is that something that is functional for you and you want to keep? Or do you have a proclivity to fixing things and making everything better at the expense of, maybe your uh, energy and relaxation? Is that something that you want to keep? There are pros and cons to both. It's not that either
Right.
one is always right and always wrong. There are trade-offs, but having a clear idea of why, which one is the more optimal way of being is going to reinforce that one, or we're able to kind of, direct behavior to reinforce one as opposed to another.
Well, I don't want to get too lost in this kind of side side issue, but when you've been somebody who is inclined towards doing and getting things done and taking care of things um, promptly, and
Hmm.
you've been doing a lot of that kind of thing for a very long time, and now you're wishing that you could get a break, stop.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of tricky because, like I said, my inclination has always been do.
Hmm.
Um, but now, somewhere between taking care of things and not letting things become problems and trying to get a break, um, it it's just seems like it's kind of a messy area because I can't really, I don't know how to sort that out.
Well, the first thing is, why was your inclination always to do? What was the motivation behind being the one who sorts everything out and takes care of everything?
Well, I mean, there are probably multiple motivations, but
Mhm.
some of it was just, I mean, I've long quoted that general idea that you were talking about earlier from the Tao Te Ching, uh,
Yeah,
about handling problems when they're small.
yeah,
Um, and, so it would be things like take care of this before it becomes a real issue, before it becomes something that, we wind up having to pay somebody to take care of, or, so it was more about keeping things from becoming chaotic.
yeah.
Take care of these problems while they're small, and life, that's one part of your life that you can um, um, rest somewhat easy with, you
Yeah,
know.
which is a very logical way of being.
Right.
But also notice that it's coming from this kind of aversion for, complication and stress. And,
Hmm.
so it's like it makes a lot of sense to do that thing and take care of things when they're small, but it's also because we don't want to have to deal with things. It's like the fewer things I have to deal with, the better. And so let me just take care of this thing now because it's easy and now it's off my plate. But it's coming because there is this idea that I don't want to handle the bigger things. And that can be for any number of reasons. But just recognizing that motivation, because then when you are faced with the bigger things, that's coming into play. When you're in a situation where you're the caretaker and you have everything on your plate, things have gotten big. So now what is the motivation, or what have you been trying to avoid effectively by trying to take care of things and fix things that is now right in front of your face? What can you
Say it
now no longer
again.
avoid? Yeah.
I
So
wasn't clear on that.
sure. So if for your whole life you have had the pattern of doing, doing, doing in order to avoid some sort of outcome that is undesirable, right?
Hmm.
If you find that you are now in the situation where you're a caregiver and you have everything on your plate and you have a to-do list that's so long, you might be at that point that you have been trying to avoid for by doing for so long. So
Yeah.
what is it that you have been trying to avoid? What is directly in front of your face now that all of the doing has been trying to unsuccessfully prevent from happening?
Hmm. It seems like it's um, trying to avoid um, things becoming chaotic, out of control. Um, I'm not sure what else is there, but I think that's the primary thing I'm picking up on here.
Yeah. So can you start to relax into the idea that things are at times chaotic and out of control? Can you feel what that first of all brings up in the body? The idea that things are out of your control.
To call it fear or anxiety seems to, well, I'll drop the anxiety. I'll just go with fear, but calling it fear doesn't seem entirely accurate. It seems like
Mhm.
it's something else. What that could be, I have no idea. But for the time being, I'll just say fear. That when thinking about things being chaotic and out of control, it brings up, oh, okay. So it's not just fear, it's fear and being helpless,
Hmm.
powerless, being
Hmm.
at the mercy of everything.
Hmm. We've talked about this before with like
Yes, we have.
authority and the the big hand of, the government and bureaucracy and
Hmm.
all of that whole authority above you keeps pulling into the same idea. Now,
Okay.
So you find yourself in a situation where you do not have control. You can't control Susanna's health. You can't control the fact that she doesn't need to work. You can't control what Tuesday says or thinks about you.
Hmm.
You, you know, there are you can't control what the dogs do when they bark. Like there are innumerable things in your environment which are very clearly outside of your control. And if you're even moderately aware of any of those, I see how that can create some sort of at least mild state of distress in the body all the time because you're
Hmm.
always being faced with things that are out of your control.
Right. Yeah.
So the important thing to do is to start to recognize this feeling of fear, powerlessness, helplessness as it arises. This feeling is referencing a self who does not really exist the way that it's believed to be.
Right.
When we have that feeling of powerlessness, there is a duality being created in that moment. The them who has power and the me who does not.
Right.
The universe that is completely, you know, doing whatever it does, and the little me who is at its mercy, who has absolutely no control. And life just seems like swirling chaos around me because I can't do anything about any of it. So, in that moment, that belief and that feeling that's associated with it in the body, that sort of fear, sort of not kind of sensation, that is relating to a being who does not actually exist in that way. So, that is a moment to wake up, to look for who is it that is actually powerless, who has no control in that way. Remember, when we talk about the fact that there is no free will, no agency, and no control, it's not that
Hmm.
there is a central figure in there who is just powerless and has no control. It's that there is no central figure who is separate from anything else who could possibly control anything. It's like it's like if you drop ink into water and you see it flow down and start to swirl and curl. It's like if you took
Hmm.
one little curl of that and said, "Oh, but that curl is powerless to do anything, but it's at the mercy of the water, it's at the mercy of the waves of everything else. It's powerless. I don't know what to do. I feel so, scared and helpless and all that." It's not in any way disconnected from the whole. It is just the entirety of the ink water swirling combination is one thing. And if we just isolate one little molecule of water or one little molecule of ink, you're going to have that. Yeah, of course, that one can't, it's swept away in the waves of everything else and it has no control and all that. Yeah, it's true, but it's also not personal. It's because it is not just an individual molecule. It is part of the ink itself or part of the water itself. It is part of the entire ink water mixture, which is growing towards homogeneity. This, when we look at it, is just too microscopic of a view, which creates that sense of individuality. It's like looking at one individual molecule of H2O in that entire glass. Of course, it's not separate from everything else. It's just an illusion. So, having every time you feel that sense of powerlessness, remember that that is an illusion about that one single molecule, which is being taken apart from the entire totality of the rest of the water. And then investigate for that moment, what is it that feels like this unique identity here? Just because there's tension in the central channel So you get that from so many other things. How does that prove that you are powerless or helpless? How does how do the ideas that show Darrell's life project themselves onto the moment so that it seems that there is a narrative history that's being referenced here? That Darrell did not have power and he does not have power and he will not have power and his life is going to look a certain way because of that. It's just a movie. There's no inherent reality to that either. So having each of those instances where you feel powerless about her Susanna's health or powerless about her working, and then recognize what is it that is separating this entire experience out into individual parts who are somehow at uh have responsibility and a sense of agency for their part in this play, as opposed to being a much wider network of influences, which are making the moment show up the way that it does in this one unique way.
You know, it's interestingly coincidental how this conversation has shown up, and maybe it's not. I don't know, but it seems that way because I've been thinking about the fact that I've been noticing for last 5 or 10 days um, this selfing going on.
Mm,
That there's this sense of someone, although I stopped short of remembering to look into what was creating that. Well, not entirely. There are sometimes I have, but more often than not, I haven't. I've
yeah.
just noticed it and then kind of gone on with things. And when this stuff comes up, almost invariably, it's been a case of it's so strange that there is a sense of someone, that there's this selfing going on because I know and I can see clear indicators even today in my life that that illusion has been seen through. But
Mm,
even though that illusion has been seen through, this is happening. How
mm,
weird.
yeah. Yeah. It's patterns of behavior. It's just that the when we say that the illusion is being seen has been seen through, it's really like a temporary awareness that things are not the way that we once thought that they were. It's like
Mhm.
a peek behind the curtain. It's an insight into the workings of the machine in some way. And that has a lot of freedom with it. But then it starts to become either just a belief that we're operating out of, as opposed to a lived daily experience,
Mhm.
or um, we find that these patterns of behavior are just very strong. It's we can recognize maybe that the patterns of behavior are not personal, but they're still there nonetheless. There's no way to live a life without conditioning. It's just impossible. It's like living a life outside of the um, simulation of the mind. We can't get out of it. We cannot escape from that. That is our entire reality. So I think what's uh, maybe more accurate to say is that we discover the fact that we are living in some sort of a simulation, and that
Mhm.
what I take to be isn't really me, and that is clearly felt, clearly perceived. What it feels like to be the me has somehow shifted, at least temporarily. It feels different. Then we have lots and lots of work ahead of us to, well, not really ahead of us, but ahead of the system to
Mhm.
to recondition itself to meet that understanding so that our daily life reflects that understanding and stops creating as much unnecessary suffering for itself as it has been. It gets caught up in fewer and fewer of those negative, perseverating thought loops and self-referential beliefs that just are great for the, biological survival of the entity out in the jungle, but not so great when we're living in these sort of stressful, complex societies where everything feels like a tiger in a bush. We're using wrong adaptations for the environment in which we find ourselves. So the insight is kind of a one time or even many time thing, but it doesn't change all of those patterns that have been ingrained. So
Right.
for that, it's just constant awareness to reconfigure the system.
Well, let me ask you about that. See, it's a curious thing because one thing I was doing when this stuff was coming up is sort of my benchmark is that in that moment of realization uh, 2 Julys ago, was I noticed that, and I can't really describe quickly or easily what exactly this specifically points to. So it's kind of shorthand when I say that there was this something I had noticed years back as a result of meditation was what I call the ownership of experience.
Mm.
And that particular way that it shows up, that ownership of experience was gone.
Mm.
So I checked, and like, yeah, it's still there. And in fact, what I did was at one point I tried to shift back into what the ownership of experience was like,
Yeah.
just to kind of see, to kind of do an A and B
Yeah.
comparison. Yeah, it's not there. It's still it has taken its leave. But at the same time, it's really clear that there is still something there that gets construed as me or I or something. And the one thing I noticed, and what you said just now brought it to mind again, was that there's this selfing going around being the one who has seen through self.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really important.
Yeah.
And I try to hang on to that as much as I can. But at the same time, becoming aware of that in the last few days, I realized, you know, that's really not in your best interest. We need to find a way to let go of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's a um, that's kind of I don't know what I can't think of the right word for this, but that's kind of for lack of a better word, kind of a trap.
It is. Yeah, absolutely. It creates that sense of continuity that isn't really there. It's like, yes, my um oh, what can I say? That's not a good example. Um Yeah, I mean, it's like if when you were 15, started taking piano lessons and you took piano lessons for like 2 years. In that time, you were a piano player. You were learning how to play piano.
Right.
If you never touch the piano again for the rest of your life, you're no longer a piano player. Like you're no longer, learning piano. You can't keep living off of that, that the 2 years is like I just got the thought of like Al Bundy, living out his
Yeah.
high school football, career, right? Like if you that's it's an old reference for people, but like, the idea that like what I did, I was a great football player in high school, and then you're, 50 years old and still thinking about that time that you were a great football player in high school. Yeah, you're not a great football player anymore, buddy. That's not
Right.
the same you. You're not the same, you're not that 17-year-old anymore. There's a completely different continuity of experience here. So we do tend to kind of do that. And especially even in the spiritual world, peak experiences, insights, things like that have with them a certain kind of goal-oriented achievement label. So it's like, yes, I have seen it. I have done the thing. I have achieved the thing. Thank you. And but but no, there was an experience of something at one point. Where is that person now? Where is the person who had that insight right now?
Mhm. Right. Nowhere.
Exactly. This is the person sitting here has never had that insight. Everything about the person sitting here is different from the one who was there 2 years ago, 3 years ago. A few, neurons are the same. A few eye cells are the same. Most everything
Mhm.
else has been exchanged at this point,
Right.
right? All the experiences, the patterns of thought, all of that, the physical entity itself. I mean, it's just completely different. So why do we refer back to a memory of something? A memory which, from this current vantage point, cannot even be verified. That playground incident might never have even happened. You could be hallucinating that every time you think about it. It could be the mind just completely fabricating a brand new thought right now when you think of it. And you have no way to know that that actually existed, nor that it existed the way that you think you currently remember it being. All of that is infallible and it's all created by the mind. The only thing we can rely on is what is our direct experience right now. Am I selfing right now? Not did I have a period where I didn't self 3 years ago? What is going on right now? That is the only sort of proof of our, experience of awakening or delusion in any given moment.
Well, then how could we ever say that we have seen through self and that we um, have dissolved or broken or whatever word you want to use, the first fetter or the first three fetters? Um, there are people that we know, and I don't need to mention anyone, not because this is not a statement against anyone,
Mhm.
but there are people whose names we know who, um, when we think and talk about them, I think it's sort of implied that, they've done that work, they finished it.
Mhm.
It's more or less done for them. So how do we even come to that?
That is an excellent question. And it's why we don't use that terminology. We don't talk about breaking them in that way because if you talk about breaking a fetter, it implies that A, the fetter is real, which it's
Mhm.
not.
Right,
B, that there is somebody to have broken the fetter, which there is not.
right.
C, that there is something which is permanent and continuous. That, I was previously deluded. Now I'm no longer deluded. I have broken a fetter. I am no longer trapped by the illusion of self. I have seen through it. And that I have seen through it, and thus it is permanently abiding. I am never going to be caught up in selfing again. We can't actually make that determination because you are only ever living in this present moment. You have no idea what is going on underneath the surface, right? Again, as we've said, 95% of everything is subconscious.
Hmm.
You have no idea what is going to happen outside of this moment. To say that you have completely broken, say, craving and aversion, and you will never, ever have a feeling of craving again, I don't know how anybody could actually say that because they do not know what the rest of their life is going to be. All we can say is I am not craving anything now, and I have not had or, fallen into the trap of craving in recent memory. Great, but we do not know what's going to happen next. We can have the humility to say there's a pattern of behavior which has changed. If I'm appealing to memory, I can say that I remember a time when this body was really, craving that thing and was constantly at the mercy of fulfilling every single time that a whim came to mind and I thought of a bar of chocolate, I went and ate a bar of chocolate, and that was, the way I was. Now all of a sudden, a bar of chocolate comes to mind and I'm no longer interested, or, there's no pull towards it. I've seen through the concept of craving and recognize that just because the body feels a certain way or a mind creates a certain image, that I don't have to do anything about it. And then it just doesn't happen anymore. That's great. But we can't say that that is absolutely never going to happen. We have changed the conditioning of the system such that it seems at this point to be less likely than it used to. But I don't think we can ever definitively say that it is now an impossibility for this system. Get
Mm.
stranded on a deserted island, see if craving comes back, right? Like there are situations where things might be different. I know I love Shinzen Young has said, like, when we talk about equanimity, well, that's great, but try equanimity in a sensory deprivation tank for, a week. Now try it in a sensory deprivation tank in a week while you're being stuck with needles. At what level does your equanimity level cease to be sufficient? You know, at at any point, we only know that we are having the experience that we're having and that our insight is sufficient to our current experience. There are periods where we see that it's not. You get challenged in a way, it's like, oh, didn't know that was still there. Great. Now I have an opportunity to look into something else. It's not a failing, it's just one more opportunity to find something that hadn't come up before. And I think that's a much healthier way to go about it because now there's no reification of the self who has gotten some sort of accolade and who has completed a project and who is now completely immune to ever having any sort of thought in the future. Because again, it's a messy biological system of wetware, which is creating all of these thoughts and all of these behaviors. And all of our behaviors are being influenced by the complete totality of the universe around us. We do not act in any way in in a vacuum separate from anything else.
So how should we best understand um, people who are generally regarded well, they're respected, in other words, and I'm thinking about the kind of the names that
Yeah.
we talk about now rather than, say somebody from, you know, 15, 20 years ago or more.
Yeah.
People who have demonstrated that they're solid and reliable in terms of their behavior. They're not like what is it? Never been sure how to say his name, Choyam Trungpa.
Oh, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Yeah.
Yeah, someone like him who's like, you know, danger Will Robinson.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
uh, these are people who are solid and reliable. Um, you might even um, recommend them to somebody to read their book or watch their videos.
Totally.
And these are people who, by their own accounting, say that there was a time when things were different. I began this process and now things are different. They're not the way they used to be. So how do we understand that for purposes of just being able to have a frame of reference so we can see what's going on in our own lives without any kind of goal-oriented
Yeah.
attainment, just simply, I just don't want to suffer anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
So how to go
yeah,
ahead.
no, no. Well, that's the whole thing. We have never lived their lives before and after. So
Mhm.
we don't know what their actual experience is. All we have is this kind of third party. We hear what they say, and then we take our experience and try to figure out what that would be like in relation to us.
Mhm.
Well, okay, in my experience, I have had suffering that's like this, so I can envision that a lack of that would be like this. They must be
Right.
experiencing life like that. It's only our projection. We don't know. You can only ever understand what somebody else has described about their experience and then taking that on yourself to make some sense of that. Why I think that becomes problematic is because it's very easy for us to overly exaggerate what we think we hear other people saying and to make more out of it than what they're actually describing.
Ah, okay.
So where I think it is just the most important thing is to keep coming back to your own experience. And you can check in, right? So like we have memory. Again, it's quite infallible, but it's the only tool that we have for this sort of thing. So we can say, I do remember a time when I used to feel like this. Now all of a sudden I feel like that's different. Like I remember not, feeling this way or feeling a way that was other than this. Like I saw, can't remember if I mentioned this, this was a couple months ago. I saw a video on YouTube of this. It was like a short film. It was only like a 7-minute short film or something. And it was this like 20 some year old who was like, um, it was like kind of like a day in the life in her head, sort of. So she was like going through her life with her friends and all that sort of thing. But you're hearing the kind of like inner narration that's
Mhm.
going on. And it's like, so she's sitting with her friends at like at a restaurant and like obsessing about like, am I talking too much? Do they think I'm, be too self-involved? And like having that like self-referential, like constantly checking in of like what other people think about you and how that, how you're being experienced and questioning what you're doing and like that super obsessive self-thought. And it was like, wow, I completely forgot that was a thing. Like until I saw that, I did not remember that level of like complete chaotic self-involvement with thoughts was a reality that I've experienced in the past and that other people currently experience. I think it is obviously there are lots of thoughts that are still here and an inner world is very vibrant and all of that, but it's very different from how it used to be, clearly. But I forgot, and then when you see like some external representation of it, it's like, oh, I recognize that. Okay, interesting. So in some cases, our memories are useful. In some cases, it is like, we just adapt over time to not even recognizing how much we have changed. So it can be both ways, um, which is why it's really important to just notice now, in what way am I causing suffering for myself or am I experiencing suffering right now? We might even clarify that as by, in what way is identification with something causing suffering right now?
Okay.
And then we look to find, well, is it because it feels like I am the center of the universe and everything is about me and it's all in how things relate to me and I relate to them and I care what other people think and all of that. Okay, so then look into all of that and then we can do all the investigations that we do. Is it I'm identified with feeling like I need things to be the way that I want them to be for me to be okay? That I need to fix the world so that I'm not uncomfortable, that I need to put food in all the time to distract myself, or I need to constantly go through my phone, obsessively soaking in social media just to distract myself from actually being in the body. What is here that is causing suffering? Because there is some sort of identification with a need or with a want or just with an identity, an identification with something. How is that causing suffering right now?
Um, as
Sorry,
an
and I just
aside,
want to say, and it might even be the identification with one who has seen through self, or one
oh
who is
yeah,
one with everything. I've seen it all. I am, fully enlightened. I am really feel like I'm connected with everything. But where is the limitation in that? How is that identification still causing some form of subtle suffering in your life?
right. And for the record, the first one, someone who has seen through self, okay, but the second one, I would never say that that has or is
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I, I wanted to be able to actually mention that because after becoming aware of it recently, um, you know, um, I wanted to bring it up, but it came up without trying. It came up
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah,
This conversation was just the um, uh, perfect conversation in which to discuss that. And as an aside, I wanted to mention, we talked recently about, you know, the question of honesty, and that when it was when someone said to me that um, someone said something that questioned my honesty, and I became uncomfortable to look into that. And one of the things that has become clear is that there are a lot of things like that that either I'm not seeing because it's more of a blind spot, but I'm becoming aware of it. And instead of not saying anything about it, because trying to um, if I don't say anything about it, then it's not true. Well,
yeah,
instead saying something about it, and not keeping it to myself. Or there were some other areas, but anyway, that this has kind of touched on that, and that the issue of honesty is about these little things that I'm not really admitting to myself.
yeah,
So, and in the moment, there's kind of this little niggling feeling that something's off, and then it gets ignored, and it's been forgotten. Okay,
yep,
all right, well, it's been forgotten, so in effect, it's not true. Well, no, it is true, and it needs to be acknowledged in
yeah,
some way or another. It needs to be put out in the open. So there's more to be done there, but it's already starting to become clear what that issue is about. So when it comes to there are a couple of things here. When it comes to the matter of habits that are not in a person's best interest, in my case, caffeine and the Provigil, um, that when the thoughts come up, that's the reminder to stop and look into what's going on in that moment that might be giving rise to that feeling. If it doesn't seem like maybe it's necessarily about anything that's going on around me in that moment, it might just be the overall state of affairs in our life right now, and be aware of that, and then um, feel into um, the sensations in the body that
mhm.
are creating the push towards those things.
Yeah, yeah. And also notice because like even when you say that the overall state of affairs in the house right now, that is going to still be either felt or mentally represented in some way to be
Or
known.
both.
Yeah, or both to be known. Otherwise, there is no such thing as the state of affairs in a house.
Mhm.
Right? Like there's a person here, a person there, a person there. That's it. Like in any snapshot, that's all there is. There has to be some concept of Susanna doesn't feel well. She's working. Tuesday is stressed out and something. The dogs are running around. There's some relationship that has to be created by a concept in order to create state of affair of the house. So you will probably feel stress or you will feel something in the body and maybe some thoughts that represent the state of the house and like that is like the label of for state of the house just like we have the label car which refers to a whole bunch of different things within a category
Right. Now, you point that out. You make it a point to mention that for what reason? In other words, what am I overlooking there when I had spoken about that right before you?
because your experience of whatever it is that's uncomfortable that's driving you towards having the idea of getting a cup of coffee for instance you it's not just the state of of the house that is causing that there's a particular feeling and or thought in the body which is it might be driven by something in the state of the house. Like you might have a thought about Susanna having to work, you're not working or feeling guilty. then you feel a quick flash of guilt, then you get the craving for the coffee. It's not the state of the house, it's that particular little guilt chain in the link that made that sensation in the body that we associate with guilt that then triggered you into don't want to sit with that, let's get a cup of coffee. Or that you hear the dogs barking and Tuesday is yelling at somebody and Susanna's working and you're just feeling like overwhelmed by amount of stuff to do and so much chaos. Again, feel in the body that feeling of overwhelm is happening. That feeling of overwhelm, then you poop out a thought that says coffee, and then yes, okay, that's a good idea. Let me escape for a few moments and get a cup of coffee. That's going to help things. But there is some experience that is being felt in the body and or kind of conceptually represented by the mind that is leading to that thought about using caffeine as an escape. Otherwise, it wouldn't show up. Just simply being there in a state of complete equanimous openness with dogs and the family and everything would be fine. You wouldn't have that urge for coffee in that state. You would
So
just
I'm,
be
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I'm missing something because
yeah,
I had mentioned what I thought was more or less the same thing, that be aware of the thoughts around it and the
no.
sensations in the body and feel into those. And then what you're saying now, it sounds like you're saying more or less the same thing, but with greater detail. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what did I miss? I overlooked something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of home in on that because when you say like, you know, only because like you had said, there might be a sensation in the body or there might be a thought, and then you said like, or the general state of the house. But I want to just be really clear that there is no particular state of anything which causes you to crave that. It is all coming from in here, either a mental representation of it or some sort of emotional or physical sensation.
Right. So in other words, um, I was I was overlooking the fact that that quote state of affairs in the house is more bodily sensation and mental activity.
Exactly.
It's not separate from or outside of.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
only
I see.
affecting you because there's an internal representation or an internal reaction to it.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, there would be no, you would just be sitting there like this calm, stoic Buddha with everything going on, and you would just be not touched by any of it. And if you're not touched by any of it, then there's nothing, you don't need caffeine to distract from being untouched. So it has to have some internal effect for you to then want to escape from that.
Okay. And um, it sounds like what you're saying is that it's pretty much without question. There's not any doubt about the caffeine, um, and the Provigil, and of course we could list infinite number of things, but
Mm.
in my case, those two things serve as a distraction.
Yeah.
That's not even up for debate.
No.
Okay, all
No,
right,
not really. No, because because if it was like you had this like craving for coffee and decaf was just as suitable, then we know, okay, well, I just really love the taste of coffee and I have cozy
right,
associations of like the warmth and the flavor and it feels really good when I have it. Or even that like every time I go to do something, whatever it is, I have like a habit of getting coffee and then it's like a one-to-one thing and then we could isolate down. But if like caffeine decaf coffee has no interest whatsoever, then no, it's definitely not any of that. It's what is that caffeine promising to do for you?
right,
And because you said, like, first of all, it's not really functional as like a positive energizer. You don't really get much out of that anyway. But as you said, it does promise that it's going to change your state in some way. It's going to change the mental state, then that is purely what it's trying to do. It is purely for a way to say this is not okay the way it is. That chemical is going to change things.
okay,
And that is just about distracting from feeling the discomfort of being alive right now in exactly the formation of which everything is in this household, in this body.
Okay, so and just a quick recap. So when those thoughts arise, when that impulse arises, it's what's going on in the mind, what's going on in the body. Get
Yep.
into that.
Yep.
Then the other thing we talked about with regards to I guess looking more deeply or more carefully into the illusion of a self,
Mhm.
it's and and this is why I'm asking about it because I'm probably going to miss something or kind of botch this to some degree. If I understood correctly, the practice there is um, there was something that was used as kind of an indicator or something to let you know, okay, now's the time to look. And I forget what that
Mhm.
was. But then it's um, once that's noticed, whatever that was, it's looking into, you know, who or what is there that is um, having this experience or not wanting this experience or is trying to avoid
Mhm.
that thing or believes themselves to be, you know, fill in the
Yeah.
blank.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's when we recognize that there is some form of selfing, some form of identification going on. And that was when I said, look into what aspect of identification right now is causing suffering. And then tuning in and recognizing if it is like a selfing thing, if it's like a first fetter thing, then we just look at, okay, what feels like the self right now? Like we had talked about earlier, yeah, like even being the guilty one who's, responsible for doing all the right things in the house. And you get that feeling of guilt and you get that feeling of responsibility. Who is the one at the center of that experience? Who is the one who is supposed to be marked by guilt, who is supposed to be responsible, who is able to have agency, who is able to act independently of all of causes and conditions that have led this moment to being the way that it is? Tune in, and you can rhetorically ask the question like that and see what happens, but you can also actively investigate in which of your five senses, external or internal mental senses, can you find anything that seems to be proving that that sense of self is right here. Uh, you might find mental thoughts of some sort that have like visual images or self-talk or something that seem to be corresponding to it. You might have sensations in the body that seem to be corresponding to it. Just again, that tension in the central channel. But then question, is that actually proof of the one who feels guilty, of the one who can have agency or do something or have responsibility? And just investigate each one of those independently so that it breaks down that association. So we're taking that higher level view where we can see all of the different components that were once believed to be a self, and then actively investigate each of them so that, oh, no, actually that's not that's not it.
And when you say actively investigate each of them, you mean break them down individually. Like first, oh, there's a mental picture
Yep.
of me seeing my body in some form or fashion or some
Yep.
part of it. Okay, I see that, and then
And
there's
hold
this.
your attention on it a moment so that you really recognize, like, okay, that's
Ah,
all that it
okay,
is.
all
I
right.
see it, and it's a mental image. If I had a mental image of Barney the dinosaur, it doesn't mean I am Barney the dinosaur, right? Like, it's it's just that level of what is it, how, and then really like holding attention on it breaks that personal connection because now you're recognizing it in kind of isolation, and it's
Okay.
lost some of it's almost like, okay, here's a new one. Do you remember Voltron?
Vaguely, I don't know that I saw much of it, but enough to know what you're talking about.
Okay, super obscure for anybody watching this, especially if you were not, around in the 80s, watching cartoons in the 80s. But basically you have like these like individual mechanical like lion robots that were independently manned by individual people, and then they would join together into one giant robot. So you have like one lion for each leg, one lion for each arm, this one for the torso, and then like the head. And so this whole thing would become this giant fighting robot manned by
Mhm.
these five different people. And uh, basically, by themselves, they are just these individual, characters, but together they
Right.
become this one big being that we call Voltron. Separately, they're individual lion robots. This thought, as it shows up, when it is kind of like magnetically stuck to the sensation, stuck to other beliefs, other thoughts, stuck to the inner voice, it becomes that kind of Voltron of Darrell or Todd. It becomes the bigger thing. And then we take them apart and they become weaker. They lose identification with that overarching thing. It's no longer Voltron if you remove, two of its limbs. So just taking the thought in isolation, that is no longer a Darrell. That is just a thought in isolation, who again could be Barney or anybody else. It doesn't, there's no clear self available in that particular thought. Just
Yeah.
like the sensation when you feel it in the chest, there is no self, there is no guilty party, there is no such thing as guilt in general in that sensation of tension in the chest. It is
I see.
just the feeling of muscular tension or hormonal, fluctuations.
Okay. One thing about that, one thing I've noticed with the mental representations, the images is that they tend to be kind of fleeting.
Hmm.
So how do
So
you
then,
how do you really zero in on something when it shows up and disappears very quickly?
so then at least notice how quickly they flee,
Okay.
and are they is it then replaced by another similar of a kind? If you have a thought about the body in a certain position or performing a certain action, that thought might go whoop and it's gone. But is it quickly replaced by another of that same sort of situation, that same kind of self-reinforcing, situational reinforcing concept?
Okay. All right. All right. So that's really helpful because I do this stuff some um, here lately, not as much as I had been, but something showed up earlier this week that you really need to make. There needs to be some um, move towards remembering to do this more. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. We'll do that. Um,
It's the
and
first step.
yeah. Um, but when it actually happens, I think things were moved over too quickly. So that fine tuning of it, really spending time l- zeroing in on being aware of these individual components.
Yeah.
I felt like something was missing and or something was not adequate, and so that that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
get that. Good. I'm glad we covered that then.
yeah. Um, so when it comes to, well, I think I've answered my own question because we were talking earlier about deconditioning the belief. The practice that we just talked about is precisely what we can use to
Yeah,
begin to undermine that. Okay.
exactly.
Oh, I know what it was. So when it comes to selfing, sometimes selfing can, for whatever reason, it seems to happen in a blind spot.
Mm, yeah.
And like the whole thing with being the one who has seen through self.
Yep.
I couldn't tell you how long that's been going on.
I love that.
No, but it only got noticed in the last 5 days or so. Um,
That's
so
amazing.
what is a reasonably reliable um, uh, indicator, reminder that selfing is happening?
Mm.
Would it just simply be that there's some kind of suffering or discomfort?
I think that's it's a really useful kind of metric. the problem is that suffering can also be very subtle, and sometimes we can cause other
Yes.
people suffering without recognizing that we're the one causing their suffering too.
Yeah.
You know, I'm fine. They think we're a total asshole, but I'm fine. You know, having yeah. I think the thing is to recognize it because it comes in so many different guises. This
Mhm.
potential for identification that what I'm really advocating for is a life which is that kind of meta awareness is turned on most of the time,
Oh.
where you're going through life and it's not that you're detached from it in, like a dissociated way, but
Mhm.
just that there is this other um, recognition that any thought that shows up is not yours.
Mm.
It's non-identified. It's just as it is. That sensations are just as sensations. And anytime that isn't the case, anytime that there really is a playing out of the story or belief in the thought or a real need for something to be different than it is, then in that moment, there is selfing going on. And it's fine. Just be aware of it. And then see in that moment, can you relax into whatever it is? Can you investigate to find out what it is that is causing that sensation of identification? But it's really, we go through periods of life before awakening, which can be rather autonomous. You get in the car to drive, and 20 minutes later, you're at your destination. You haven't been aware the entire time. And that's totally
Right.
normal. But it's a detached kind of awareness or unawareness, where we're autonomous without really being present at all. What I'm talking about, is being really present, but not in a way where I am present. It's more that presence just is. It's like an awareness of being without the centrality of the I who is the one who is believed to be the one being. So there's
Okay.
awareness, and in that awareness, thoughts still arise, bodily sensations, emotions, all of that still arise. But that awareness is impersonal, and that awareness treats those things in an impersonal way. So just because they're there, they do not have that self reflective magnetism or stickiness that the I thought had or the I belief had when everything was about me. So the more we are aware from that meta awareness, more impersonal, just presence, being, whatever word you want to use for it, the more all of these things arise and pass. They're seen, they can be investigated, but none of it has that kind of personal center to it, like like it used to.
Okay. So, there are times where I'll notice thoughts and they're sometimes there is just the very beginning of some kind of reaction, like maybe a bit of adrenaline or maybe a sense of concern or recognition of something that needs to be taken care of. But then there's this stepping back and seeing the thought and just simply basically saying, okay, and then letting the thought go. Um, and the concern was that um, because there's so much of this investigating, looking into, feeling into, that it seemed there was a sense that that was not the best way to respond to the thoughts. But at the
Mm.
same time, if in that moment I can recognize, oh, it's just a thought, and whatever sensation might have been coming with it, it is just kind of a byproduct of that thought. And I recognize that it's just a thought and it doesn't have any substance or reality, and just let it go on its way. Is there really a problem in responding like that?
No, I mean, it's really about the internal posture
Mm.
towards all this. That's really the thing is there any sense that I am observing the thoughts and letting them go on their own way? Or do,
Ah, okay.
right? That's really
Right.
where the sticky is.
Okay. All right.
Um,
I'll have to pay attention to that because my hunch is that that's happening to some degree or another. Um, so for people who don't meditate,
mhm.
because I used to, I mean, I logged thousands of hours over many
Yeah,
years, and then it just kind of stopped happening.
yeah, yeah.
This business of investigating things and being aware of thoughts is that um, a legitimate, effective way to get to that meta awareness to increasingly more degrees.
Yes, the only thing is it's actually easier just in terms of like brain chemistry. I think it having some form of just uh, normal meditation practice of some sort is profoundly beneficial for making it easier to have that meta awareness, to
Okay.
become also just more living like in a mindful, examined life
Mhm.
is only possible when we have that ability to become aware of what is going on. And that is just strengthened so much by doing basic either breath watching meditation or like I think see hear feel is still a phenomenal practice. um, I found that to be so helpful, and that's great because you also can do it anytime no matter what you're doing. You don't have to just be sitting on a meditation cushion. You can really take that into your daily life, and it bridges the gap. I think that's the other reason why I'm such a big fan of the see hear feel is that it bridges the gap between it's like sitting on a cushion watching your breath or counting your breath is like going to the gym and lifting weights. You're exercising certain parts of the brain. So you're setting that I'm focusing on one specific task. Every time you get distracted from that task and lost in thought, your anterior cingulate cortex kicks on. It drags your attention back over. You're developing that dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strength that we talked about before, which is that, kind of the more, wise, rational part of the mind. You're tuning down the default mode network, which is causing all of that selfing thought and behavior to begin with. So it's having all of that beneficial effect. And the more you do that, the more it's strengthening those pathways and weakening the pathways of selfing and distraction and all of that. So by itself, it's a great practice. But once you get off of the mat, you are more prone to being lost back in your normal ways of just being lost in the mind and all of that. And where I think see, hear, feel works so well is that it's doing the same thing. You are focusing on one point, whether it's, your visual field, your something in the auditory field, in the body, wherever, you fully are engaged with it for 2 or 3 seconds, like full awareness. And then you're also aware of how quickly your attention shifts. And as that
Mhm.
attention shifts, you then go with it. And now the attention is fully there. So you are staying present, kind of riding the bucking bronco of attention as it's moving from one sense field to another. And as you do that, it's having the same kind of benefit that you are increasing your concentration level, your ability to focus on a topic. You're also becoming more and more aware of the sensory clarity of what is actually happening in each of your senses all the time, which we may not be as aware of when we're just focusing on our breath or, going about our day. And then extra beneficial is that we are doing it while we're, walking, doing dishes, riding a bike, doing whatever we're doing. We can be focusing on, our experiences as we're in it. So we are practicing it in life, which makes it more likely that we are going to be attentive and present and aware when we are engaged in those activities in life. It's like building it into the system that now I'm just present wherever I am because I've trained myself to be present wherever I am. If we just do it on the mat, you might train yourself to be present sitting on a meditation cushion. And then when you get up, it doesn't hold true as much. You're still building the muscle, but it's not that same
It's not
kind of
translating.
integrated connection. Exactly. Exactly. This is like, see, hear, feel is like you don't just work out in the gym. It's like you're actually like lifting rocks in your garden and you're, doing stuff in the house and putting it to use.
Right. So, the one other thing that was kind of lingering for me was when we were talking about the aversion to doing things, whether it's taking care of the stripping on the building out back or, you know, vacuuming and steam cleaning the rug, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, uh, you had talked about how to work with that aversion. Um, well, and as a side issue, the difference between doing something for these other motivations or doing it just because it's it's happening in the moment naturally without a sense of self involved. But I can't remember what you said about how to work with that aversion.
So largely very similar sort of thing, but it was to find out the motivation that
That's
was
right.
underneath. So why are you, what is driving that motivation of either fixing the shed or not fixing the shed, letting it rot and go to hell, or, actually taking care of it right away? And um, what are you trying to gain and what are you trying to prevent from either of those options? I'm trying to prevent the decay and thousands of dollars worth of damage and more work in the future, or I'm trying to, gain a sense of just freedom and ease because now it's done and I never have to think about it again. And I just feel like accomplished and I actually feel good about myself that I've done this thing. Just being aware, I'm avoiding feeling guilty by not doing it. What are the motivations for doing it? What are the motivations for not doing it? And then being very clear with those. And then again, we can use that same sort of digging in with whatever that is of where is the one who is supposed to be the one who is feeling guilty for doing it or not doing it? Where is the one who is going to get the praise and the pride of a job well done? Where is that one being felt? We can, is there such thing as pride? Is there such thing as guilt? Also, just noticing, like, yeah, I have a motivation that leads me to constantly being risk averse. And so you're going to notice that popping up all over. Or I have something that makes me feel like I need to solve everything and everybody else's problems because that's the only way I can feel safe. Okay, so recognize that there's an issue with safety. Really finding that in that way brings you back to that pattern that you're going to find popping up in everything. And then you can question, well, am I really not safe? You can convince yourself, actually, I am safe. Like in this moment, I am safe. We can go down the line of who even is safe or who is separate from that which is not, which could not be safe. So many different ways to work on it, depending on whether we're going the psychological angle, the non-dual angle, or the kind of like emotional angle. Just with the yeah, however it's showing up for us. I mean, lots of different options.
So the feeling of aversion, because the way it has looked to me is that it's just the feeling. It's just I see something or I'm aware of something that requires something from me, and there's sort of this there's this feeling in the body that's sort of um, the equivalent of a no.
Hmm.
But you said see what's underneath the aversion. So when that aversion arises, there's going to be something underneath that. It doesn't just come up on its own, correct?
Yeah, there's some thought that has triggered it. There's some emotional something that has triggered it. It's definitely not just seeing a piece of, weather stripping dangling and just feeling like deep no towards that. Like there has to be, you're saying no to something, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, yeah.
Well, I ask because, and this is something that has come up a lot in our conversations. A lot of the times there's not a in quotes, audible thought,
Hmm.
audible words in the mind. It's seen and some kind of processing happens, and then there's that feeling of aversion. So,
Be aware. I do think you're probably, of course, I have no idea exactly what's going on in your head because we all have different experiences in that way. But
mhm,
I suspect there is something which is being missed in between there, where you see it, and there is either maybe an
okay.
image of you going to buy the part for it, or actually doing the work, or something which is an intermediary, which you're actually reacting to with the no.
Okay,
Because
so
it
there's
by
some kind
itself
of
is fine.
something.
There's something which is projecting you doing the idea of you doing the fixing, which is then causing that. And however that shows up, it might not be auditory, but it might be a mental image of something. It might be something else going on
Okay.
in some other capacity. But just
I'll
be
just have to start
aware.
paying attention because
Yeah,
with what you're saying, then the only thing I can assume is that it's happening remarkably fast.
it does. It can be. Yeah, which is what makes it tricky because it can be like a really quick flash of something, and then before you're really aware of it, you just feel like this icky sense of nope, do not want that. And then we just stop there. That's the problem is we don't like backtrack, we don't um question whether it's really the case that does this icky sensation that says no actually mean that I shouldn't do it? Or is this just in reference to something which I have just thought, which, is based on my own conditioning? Like it doesn't really say anything about whether or not I should actively fix it. It's just a reaction that comes up. Just like if
Hmm.
you have a piece of chocolate cake in front of you and you feel like you have this, ooh, doesn't mean you should actually eat the cake. It just means that there's something that has, there's an association there that the body says, ooh, yay. Or the
Right.
mind says, ooh, yay. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't fix it. It just means that there's some association with work, with more, finances, with time, with something that is triggering something in you that feels nope, not having it.
Right. Okay.
Sometimes that's reliable, oftentimes it's not.
Hmm.
Oftentimes it's just pointing us back to, okay, well, I can look into that.
Okay. All right. Well,
Uh,
this has been, I got the sense for several times during this conversation that this has been um, not only incredibly helpful, but also incredibly important.
Good.
It seems like there were a number of really important, very um, significant um, matters that were discussed. Uh,
Amazing.
so, and along with that is kind of this sense of um, like a head full of stuff that needs to be processed. All
Yeah, I get that.
right, man.
All right. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
All
Talk to
right.
you
I'll
after.
see you soon. Yeah. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.